Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than normal in that the first half is going to be a quick spoiler-free review of Bones and All by Camille d'Angelis. I think that's how you say her last name. And then the second half of the video, which is related to how I felt about this, is going to be just sort of an author-book discussion about how after finding out an author's reasoning or explanation for writing a book, how having that knowledge affects either your reading experience or your reflections back on the book. But first, let's go ahead and get into the review. So Bones and All tells the story of Marin. She is a young woman, and ever since she can remember, she has been an eater, which is the author's term for essentially a carnivore, a ghoul, anything like that. So for example, when she's 2 years old, this is how the book starts off. Her mother leaves her with a babysitter, and when the mom comes back, a lot of the babysitter's missing, I'll put it that way, and the babysitter's eardrum, for example, is found inside 2-year-old Marin's mouth. So a very graphic book, but you guys know I have no issues with that. So Marin occasionally eats people. It happens maybe once every few years, and eventually her mother decides to leave her. She can't handle it anymore, so much of the story is focused on Marin attempting to find her father and figure out why she is this way, if there are other people like her and everything like that. So I'll briefly get into the pros and cons. Overall, I did really enjoy this book. The main thing I didn't like was Marin. Before I get into that though, I'll talk about what I liked. So I did actually really enjoy how simplistic this story was and how simplistic the plot was. The writing is very good, and I didn't have an issue with the fact that this book doesn't get intensely into the mythology about where eaters come from and everything like that. I know this book had some negative reviews I saw because people really wanted to know, well, where did eaters come from? Why are some eaters different than others? I liked the simplicity of the book, and I really didn't mind that. And I also really enjoyed the writing style. So as I said, the main thing I didn't like was Marin, and you guys know I adore unlikable narrators. That's not an issue I have with books. Hell, my favorite author is Gillian Flynn, and she's the queen of unlikable narrators. But Marin I just found to be very dull, and Marin also was a bit odd in the sense that when she would eat people, she would feel terrible and have this sense of remorse. But there are instances throughout the book, and I won't say how it's happening or why. Teenage girls a couple of times are eaten, and she has no issue, it seemingly, with this happening just because they were kind of rude people. And so she just seems to have no emotional attachment to that, which just left me really uncomfortable, and I didn't understand the author's intent in doing that. And then there were just a few other minor things that irritated me about her. For example, there's this recurring theme, it happens maybe 2 or 3 times, where she seems to just really hate makeup, and it just seems to be randomly thrown into the book. And I don't know if maybe that's the author's view and she doesn't like that women wear makeup, but it happens multiple times to the point where I was just thinking, why is this here? It's not adding to the story and the character. It just, I don't know, it was odd. So overall, I would recommend it if you are interested in some kind of unique take on the horror genre, on carnivores, on eaters, or anything like that, but just don't expect to be very interested in or really enjoy the main character. So now I'm going to get into my discussion, and I did ask you guys how your views of authors affect your reading experiences on Twitter, and I got a lot of wonderful responses. They weren't necessarily related to what I was trying to get at, and I definitely think that's my fault for not wording it probably correctly. So I wasn't trying to get at authors who say you find out you dislike for whatever reason in real life, and then you end up not necessarily wanting to read their books, such as say Cassandra Clare, people like that. Or there was that author who like tracked down the 16-year-old girl who did a negative review of her book. I forget who that is, but a lot of people won't read her books now. That's not necessarily what I was getting at. What I was more so getting at was when you finish a book, or say you find out while you're reading it why the author wrote it, and then regardless of whether or not you agree with that opinion, it affects your reading experience and how. So for example, I can't remember the name of the book, but I've definitely read various young adult books where I get to the end of the book, and then in the acknowledgments the author points out that they're Christian and their faith inspired the book and it's related to it in a lot of ways, and I don't know necessarily how to connect with that. So with this book, I think I might have been saying carnivores throughout the video, but I mean cannibals. So interestingly, the book is about cannibals, and then when you get to the acknowledgments section, right away when you finish the book, it says, "When people who know I'm vegan hear I've written a novel about cannibals, they think it's bizarre, hilarious, or both. The short version is that I believe the world would be a far safer place if we as individuals and as a society took a hard, honest look at our practice of flesh eating along with its environmental and spiritual consequences. So I remember being kind of shocked when I finished the book, and the author is right. It is just interesting that someone who's vegan would be writing a book about cannibals, but when you read interviews with her, her reasoning behind doing that makes sense because she's relating to the act of cannibalism to the way that many of us decide to eat animals. Now, one thing I want to point out is this video is not an argument against veganism whatsoever. Although I'm not vegan, I actually have such admiration for people who are, and I have a lot of respect for that. I'm not just saying that, I really do. But whenever something like this happens where I finish a book and I find out such a clear explanation for why the book was written, it tends to not sit with me well, and I can't necessarily articulate why, so that's more so what this is a discussion about. So for example, Conrad from The Deckled Edge, I'll link his channel down below, when I asked about this on Twitter, he said, I usually hate knowing reasons why they wrote something, meaning authors. It's like a musician explaining their lyrics. And I think that's possibly a good explanation for whenever I feel this way, and let me know if you guys do too. I think it might be due to differing mindsets. Some people like being presented with these types of conclusions for why an author wrote a book, and I'm the type of person where if that hadn't been there in the acknowledgements, I would have been really interested to see if I came to those conclusions based on reading it versus just having them handed to me. And again, I don't think the author was necessarily wrong for putting that in the acknowledgements, but it did severely impact my view of this book. And I have to admit, when I think about this book now, I'm not thinking about the story, I'm not thinking about possibly where eaters come from, I'm just thinking about the fact that the author was a vegan. And it's not necessarily a positive or negative feeling, but it does have a huge impact on how I view the book. So part of me wishes I didn't have that knowledge, but then on the other hand, what are authors to do when these days with social media, with interviews, we know authors and their lives just to such a greater degree than we used to, and we can't necessarily fault them for that. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish working on some of my finals, but I would be really interested to see how you guys feel about this if you've ever had experiences like this. So make sure to put them down below, and once again, good luck to anybody else who's experiencing finals right now, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.